Hey, howdy-ho, everybody. This is Postmortem Nightshade, and thank you so much for joining me on the channel here today. In this week's long-form video, I wanted to touch on a topic that has been swirling around my mind ever since I started really embracing and exploring my love of cinema. And that is classics that did and did not live up to the hype for me. A great YouTuber by the name of Spooky Astronauts, an amazing channel. Please go check her out, give her some support. I love that channel. But she recently said in one of her videos that it is such a wonderful feeling when you watch a classic for the first time and it actually hits with you. And that quote really struck me because I 1000% agree. If you haven't seen my Movies for the Girlies and Guys Who Grew Up Like Me video, definitely check that one out on the channel. But in it, I mentioned that there are some classics that have hit for me, and I also explained how I have gone on a film journey in my adult age. Growing up, we didn't watch PG-13 movies in my house, but in the past couple years or so, I have really embraced my film journey and started watching whatever films I am interested in regardless of the MPAA rating. And this has, of course, led me to watching several classic films from various genres. As you may have already guessed by the title of this video, some of those classics, of course, have hit for me and some haven't. So today I wanted to talk about those classics, and the films I'll be discussing are specifically from the horror genre, one of my personal favorite genres, of course. And I plan to make more parts of this video, so this is definitely not an all-encompassing list. And of course, this is just my own personal experience and thoughts on each of these films. I'm also going to give a spoiler warning at the beginning of this video, so you have been warned. If the horror classics in this video are ones that you're interested in watching for yourself first, please pause this video, go watch them, and then come back to get my thoughts. I also just wanted to say that if you love any of the movies I don't, I'm so happy for you because it is such a great pleasure and joy to actually like a classic, enjoy a classic. In my experience, it helps you feel a part of something bigger. It allows you to partake in something that so many other people have enjoyed, and it kind of brings all of us together in an interesting, fun, weird sort of way. But enough babbling from me. Let's start with the classic films that actually did hit for me. So, the first movie that I wanted to talk about today is The Thing. This classic horror film came out in 1982. It stars Kurt Russell and was directed by John Carpenter, a veteran of the horror genre for sure. Now, when I started my all-inclusive ratings movie journey, I had heard about The Thing vaguely, but honestly, I didn't know what it was about or what to expect. I was, of course, aware it was a deeply beloved film, but that really meant nothing to me even at the beginning of my journey because I had been disappointed by that expectation before, even when I only watched PG movies growing up. So I sat down on my couch, opened my streaming service, and started this film. I did notice that The Thing is almost 2 hours long, which made me a little nervous, a little cautious, but I was still willing to give it a chance because some of my favorite movies actually are over 2 hours long. And at about minute 15, I was hooked. The isolated setting of this film is so unique. It takes place at a research facility in Antarctica, so not only do they expertly convey the isolation these characters are experiencing, but also the added danger that the elements of this frozen tundra add on top of the murderous shapeshifter lurking about. They also throw you right into the action with this film. There is no hand-holding or traditional introduction of the characters, if you will. You get started right at the jump and go along with the research team's experience with the Thing, the shapeshifter. They don't even know what it is when they first meet it. They think it's just a dog. The acting, of course, is top-notch, and the effects are absolutely mind-blowing in this film. The scene where we are first truly introduced to the Thing sadly has to do with a pack of beautiful, beautiful dogs. But it is in this scene that we truly see what the practical effects team was capable of. And they keep up that incredible effects work throughout the entire film. It's incredible, and it holds up amazingly well, even, this many decades later. Also, I mean, the effects alone are worth the recognition the film was given, but then you add the amazing story, the gripping mystery, the suspense, and the ending, of course, that people still debate to this day. It's just perfection. The Thing for me actually got me hooked on the horror genre and is a classic that is actually one of my favorite movies now of all time. So if you haven't seen this one, please give it a try and let me know whether or not this classic hit for you. Next up is Aliens. Of course, not to be confused with Alien, the predecessor of this film. And man, the 80s had some rockin' cinema, and not just in the horror genre. Aliens is, in my book, the perfect blend of action and horror. This is, of course, the sequel to the extremely popular, exclusively horror classic Alien, and this film was directed by James Cameron and follows Sigourney Weaver's character Ripley as she unenthusiastically leads another fight against the xenomorphs. After my experience with the original Alien film, I wasn't really sure how I was going to feel about Aliens, but this was another one that at about minute 20, I was entirely hooked. This film has great pacing, even though it sits at 2 hours and 17 minutes. Aliens also manages to easily feel like an alien movie while also keeping the sequel feeling fresh, not only with a more heavy focus on action, but also with the addition of new character dynamics with Newt and Ripley's relationship with androids. It also expands on the lore of the alien universe and gives us some amazing visuals with the queen xenomorph herself and all of her eggs. Then, of course, the end fight scene between Ripley in the giant cat mecha suit and the queen xenomorph is so iconic and for me, totally lived up to the hype. And just like The Thing, the practical and visual effects in this movie hold up phenomenally, even this many years later. I don't necessarily think you need to have seen the first Alien movie to watch this one, but just to get fully immersed in the lore, I might watch the first one before jumping straight into Aliens. This film obviously gets an easy recommend from me and was a classic that blew my expectations out of the water. Now, up until this point, we have talked about classics that have entered into my favorite movies of all time category because I love them that much. But moving away from my favorite of all time category that includes these horror classics, this next film did live up to the hype for me, but it wasn't for the same reasons as the previous two movies, and it's probably not actually for the reasons you'd think. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a horror staple, and one that is often credited with kicking off the slasher genre as we know it. Now, to be upfront, I have actually been pretty scared to watch this film because of its reputation, so I only got up the courage to watch this movie recently, so it's a very recent discovery for me. I know I'm not the first to say that the brilliance of this film is in what they leave to the imagination. At this point in my movie watching journey, I've seen a lot of horror movies, but this film excels at allowing its audience to create most of the horror in their minds, which is a great strategy given that the budget on this film was so small, sitting at only $140,000. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was directed by Tobe Hooper and stars Marilyn Burns as our final girl and Gunnar Hansen as Leatherface. Something important to note about this film is that if you're like me and have seen a lot of horror films, before you watch this one, keep in mind that this was the original inspiration for a lot of horror tropes that have been so heavily criticized up until this point. So, cutting it some slack for being the pioneer in the genre, I think, is only fair. But honestly, for me, the biggest surprise of all with this film was the amount of comedic moments this movie has. I honestly don't know if they were meant to be intentionally darkly comedic or not, but this film has some scenes and one liners that I have not stopped talking about or quoting since I saw it. Watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with the right expectations may help you enjoy this classic film to its fullest, but even without my personal expectations being set before I watched this film, the unexpectedly comedic moments actually helped this movie be a surprise winner in the classics living up to my expectations category. Although it's definitely not for the conventional reason most other folks talk about. Well, now that we've got the positives out of the way, I am fully aware that the movies I'm about to discuss are well beloved, but sadly, these next three horror classics just didn't hit for me. But feel free to please kindly, disagree with me in the comments. Up first in our sadly disappointing category, we have Jaws. Directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Roy Schneider, this shark movie is truly the stuff of nightmares for most people. And as someone who also thinks sharks are terrifying, I was hoping this classic horror film from 1975 would be a smashing hit for me. However, the best and scariest part of the movie was easily the third act, but the whole film leading up to that point was just too slow, with the pacing dragging at so many different points. And while I know the animatronic shark had problems at many points throughout filming, and that's actually why we don't see Jaws very much, for me, the creepy and uncanny nature of the animatronic was pretty terrifying. So I would have actually liked to see more of it rather than just seeing it in the third act. The scene with the sea captain being eaten also felt oddly dark compared to the rest of the deaths in the movie, which his death would have been fine if the tone was just more consistent throughout the rest of the film. The iconic soundtrack, of course, is Chef's Kiss, and I really like the growth we get to see from Roy Schneider's character and his triumphant defeat of the shark at the end of the movie. However, by the time the credits rolled, this film felt way too long and lacked enough horror for me to have any more than lukewarm feelings for Jaws. Now, remember how in the first part of this video I talked about aliens? Well, get ready for some serious whiplash because the original 1979 horror classic, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Sigourney Weaver, Alien was actually not a film that lived up to the hype for me. I know, that doesn't make any sense. But I think the blend of horror action in Aliens is what really made that film work best, in my opinion. But in Alien, just like Jaws, the third act was easily the best, with the pacing in the rest of the film, again, feeling way too slow. I did like Alien better than I liked Jaws, simply because we got to catch more glimpses of the xenomorph before the final encounter in the last 20 minutes of the film, but still. Alien is also 2 hours long, and if a classic horror story is going to be a slow burn that's 2 hours, I definitely needed to feel like the payoff was high enough to validate testing my patience for so long. The production design and practical effects were amazing in this film, don't get me wrong, and Ripley is an amazing, iconic character. I love Ripley, and Sigourney Weaver's performance is an all time great. So, while this wasn't a major letdown for me, this classic just really didn't hit the same for me as it has for many others. And the last disappointing horror classic we'll be discussing in this video is The Shining. I know, cue the gasps, but honestly, after Alien and Jaws, I'm sure this isn't a surprise, and I'm sure that I've lost many people's respect as a film enthusiast, but that's okay. I like what I like, and The Shining was not one of those movies. While I mentioned that the 80s had some really great films, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining was not one of them. With a runtime of 2 hours and 23 minutes, this was another film that I feel tested my patience without a great payoff. In this video, I actually ended up putting the classics I didn't like in order from my least favorite to most favorite. So I least enjoyed Jaws, I medium enjoyed Alien, and I most enjoyed The Shining. However, winning amongst the losers isn't anything to be too excited about, in my opinion. I felt that this was the most psychologically interesting film of my least favorite classic horror movies. However, at times it felt like The Shining thought it was totally the shit being so heady, when really it just honestly came across as indecisive and pretty pretentious. I do like the performances, and the score, and the setting, but again, the pacing of this film is brutal. Building suspense is an extremely fine tuned art, and it's a very difficult thing to maintain over such a long runtime. The mystery with Danny's character and the relationship with his family and the hotel just feel like too many things that aren't explored enough, and then that just really sours the mystery for me. However, I have heard that Doctor Sleep corrects this and is actually a pretty great horror film, so let me know in the comments if I should give that film a watch. But overall, The Shining was not at all a horror classic that lived up to the hype for me, although I do get why it's so revered. It's also spoofed on a lot. The most recent example I can think of is in Zootopia 2, so check that movie out if you love The Shining. Great Disney animated classic, but it does actually pay homage to The Shining, so very interesting. But there you have it, folks. 3 horror classics that did live up to the hype, and 3 that did not live up to my expectations. But let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts on these horror classics? And as always, I want to thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to listen to me babble on about movies. And if you'd like to follow along on my movie review journey, my movie discussion journey, please like, subscribe, and follow, and I will see y'all very soon.